Thank you for joining our discussion today. In episode 2 of our Smart Manufacturing series, we're joined by our AWS partner Telit to dive into how IoT can increase manufacturing productivity as part of your digital transformation journey. I'm Miriam Kutcher, and I'll be your moderator for today's discussion. To answer what makes industrial IoT transformative and explore some specific use cases, I'm pleased to introduce our 2 presenters. Ricardo Bernello brings over 17 years of experience in the technology and IoT industry. Before joining Telit in 2008, Ricardo worked for big technology companies such as Siemens and Tata. Currently, Ricardo is head of Telit's Global Platforms Business Unit and is engaged in the creation and implementation of Telit's Platforms strategy, which enables some of the biggest companies in the world to deploy industrial IoT with advanced edge and cloud software solutions. Ricardo graduated from Sao Paulo Catholic University with a degree in business administration and has an MBA in business economics from FGV and business extension program at NYU Stern. Dave Telit has spent the last decade developing IoT initiatives for a wide variety of business critical use cases, including maritime shipping fuel efficiency, building utilization, and food processing animal monitoring. He's built collaborative partner ecosystems that help industrial leaders go to market solving digital transformation challenges for Fortune 2000 customers. Today at AWS, Dave leads 2 global industrial connectivity initiatives focused in manufacturing and agriculture, working with AWS partners and leveraging AWS IoT services to solve challenges and drive operational efficiency and productivity. He received his MBA from Ohio State University and is based in Cleveland, Ohio. And with that, Ricardo, I turn it over to you.
Miriam, thank you so much. Dave, it's a pleasure to be here talking to you about something that I love so much, that is technology and IoT and digital transformation.
Likewise, Ricardo, it's great to be with you as well.
Awesome. So let's get started here. So let's just a quick introduction about who Telit is. Telit's a very large company, and basically the only thing that we do is IoT. It's a global company with presence everywhere, and with our technology, we connect more than 40 million machines, devices, sensors every year. That means more than basically 1 new machine connected with our technologies every 1 second. So for everybody that thinks that IoT and industrial IoT is something for the future, here is the answer. No, it's not. It's something that companies are significantly investing today in order to transform their business. Telit is divided in 3 business units: on modules, where we develop semiconductors for IoT chips that goes inside of the more diverse types of applications, from connected cars to industrial cellular gateways, our connectivity packages, and our software division. Our software division is a consequence of an acquisition. In 2013, Telit acquired a spin-off of IBM Automation Group, a company called ILS Technology. And then we bring DeviceWise and SecureWise into our product portfolio. DeviceWise started inside IBM as a product called PlantWorks. And we basically invested in the last 30 years millions of dollars in R&D to get the product to the point it is, supporting customers on this digital transformation. Today, DeviceWise is used by the largest companies in the world, in the most diverse types of environments that you can imagine, from food and beverage to oil and gas, pharmaceutical, chemical, automotive, and more. Specifically on automotive, and today I prepared some slides to talk about one specific automotive use case. Today, currently 7 out of the 10 largest car makers in the world, they use our technology on the shop floor in the manufacturing environment so they can have better productivity using IoT, using DeviceWise as this IT-OT integration platform there. So why will IoT be so transformative? I really like a lot this statement from Paul Krugman saying that productivity isn't everything, but in the long run, it is almost everything. I used to say that IoT exists for three reasons and three reasons only. The first one is for you to make money. How can you use this technology to bring new innovative business models, new products to the market? So, for example, when machine builders, they can have their machines connected, this opens a complete new business for them. Instead of selling machines, maybe they can sell machines as a service. They can transform CapEx into OpEx. They can provide preventive maintenance. They can provide remote support. So this opens new services for these companies that in the past they used to supply hardware on. The second reason why IoT, industrial IoT exists is for you to save money. So how can you produce more, better, cheaper, on a more efficient way? And I even bring here some researches that show how this technology can really change the bottom line for these companies. And the third reason why I believe that IoT exists is for you to stay out of jail. So how can you use this technology to stay compliant with your market regulations? So if you are, for example, a pharmaceutical company, then you need to comply with several FDA requirements, like traceability for your manufacturing. And collecting the data from your process and properly storing this and doing all the traceability is very important. If you are in the automotive space, then ISO TS is very important for you also to have all this traceability. So certainly this technology in terms of collecting, organizing, and integrating the data can be very helpful. So make money, save money, and stay out of jail. When we are talking about saving money specifically, we believe that manufacturing is the biggest market for IoT. And McKinsey collaborates to this vision, saying that a third of the economic output of IoT is basically on factory solutions, where this technology will be very, very impactful. Where, according to McKinsey, companies, they can present cost savings in the range of 5 to 40%, depending on the level of digital transformation of the digital maturity that they are today. So we are talking here about clear ROI on the deployment of this technology. I even dare to say that companies that do not look at this technology and start right now to implement the strategies around that will be the ones that will stay behind.
Hey, Ricardo, I wanted to interject here with a point of something we see on the AWS side, and I think it resonates strongly with where McKinsey here is showing some of the top applications. We see a lot of IoT investments being driven around the operational efficiency, predictive maintenance, being driven from individual plant and maintenance teams. While there is also some corporate enterprise at work, but I'm curious in your efforts with maybe some of those large automotive companies, who do you find in the organization is really driving these sort of top two use cases that you see opportunity in, for that predictive maintenance and operation? Is it coming more from OT or IT?
That's a great question. And I think that the world is changing quite a lot there. When in the past, IT and OT used to be rivals, now these two sectors, they're emerging much more, right? So while from one end, OT is looking at their operations and saying how this technology can help me in terms of solving my daily problems I have on the shop floor, and how can I make these things faster and more productive. IT is starting to look at this and saying, hey, we need to bring a standardization in terms of how these technologies, they will work, because we don't want Frankensteins all around without a control in terms of these applications. So I see both IT and OT pushing a lot for this technology, and most important, for a standardization on this technology, because they start to realize that reinventing the wheel, custom code this application for every necessity, factory by factory, line by line, is not something productive.
Totally agree with you there. I think we're seeing that too, in the sense of, what really makes an IoT project successful or not. Often it's not the technology that's the limiting factor. It's that convergence you just mentioned of IT folks and OT folks coming together, aligning around that business challenge throughout, the organization, from the executive level down to the operator on the shop floor. That's really the key metric that we've honed in on around what makes a project successful or not in the long run, and scaling across that organization to transform it.
Fantastic. So the vision that we have, Dave, in terms of this transformation is really to support customers in terms of bringing the reality of Industry 3.0. That is the typical manufacturing word that we know that used to rule until very recently, to the new reality of Industry 4.0. So what does it mean in real terms? So when you think in terms of a brownfield factory, a factory that was probably built in the 70s or the 80s and kept growing since then, you see a very clear architecture there, where the machines and the IT systems, they are in completely different layers. Everything is isolated and based on the availability of data provided by that specific controller. And then you have something, moving from layer to layer without real flexibility there. When we see that the deployment of industrial IoT technologies, like the combination of Telit DeviceWise and AWS services, it provides much more flexibility for these factories, where we see machines not only as a machine, but as a data point. And as this data point needing to have the ability of intercommunicating between them and between systems on a much more fluid way. And that's our objective as a company, to provide this evolution in terms of architecture, avoiding the traps of custom code. So what does a factory that is adopting IoT will look like? Probably they will look like just like this picture here. So nothing different from what it used to be, because nobody will indeed change all the different machines that they have on the shop floor. They are there, they are working, they made the investment, and the people are there, and the different IT systems are there as well. So how can we bring this footprint of all devices, talking all different protocols, integrate them with an intelligent layer of communication, creating business rules, and then moving this data into local databases, IT systems, and the cloud solutions provided by AWS. That's what DeviceWise does. So we have the ability of talking to all these different devices in a no-code environment, creating all these business logics, integrating this with SiteWise and all the different points of ingestions in AWS, as well as the existing ERP, MES databases of the customer that will be on site, and all these systems, they need to coexist.
So Ricardo, looking at this slide, you've got like a Rockwell controller on the crane, you've got a Siemens PLC, AGV moving around. There's a lot of complexity in this image here that you're showing. What are some of the big challenges that you see your customers grappling with as they try to integrate these things? What are some of the things that they struggle with, or that you really have to help them when you implement your solutions on a complex shop floor like this?
Dave, the first complexity here is you see these devices, and they're clearly coming from different generations and from different vendors. And they simply are made not to talk to each other, right? When Rockwell is creating a new controller, it is not thinking in terms of how it will integrate with Siemens. Actually, they are enemies in the market, right? However, if you are managing an operation like this, you understand that in certain situations, you need to have your Rockwell controller translating a protocol and ingesting a bit in a Siemens. And unless you are using DeviceWise to do this edge protocol translation, it will require you to have software engineers creating custom code for this. And then when this data went there, somebody say, hey, I need to have traceability. I need to send this data into a local database where I'm doing the traceability. And then somebody needs to go there and write another piece of software. And then somebody said, but instead of having this data on the edge, I should have this data in the cloud, in the AWS cloud, because this is by far the safest place and most efficient way for me to do this. And somebody needs to go there and create more custom software. And then you bring a new robot from Fanuc, and it is completely isolated there, requiring more customization. So what we see is that unless you have an intelligent IoT platform that can standardize all these machine to IT communication, doesn't matter what type of machine and what type of IT we're talking about, you will be living in a lab creating projects every day on a custom model, what might not be efficient, might not be secure. And by the way, these engineers, they should be looking at the process and saying, how can I produce more, better, with better quality, instead of reinventing the wheel every time that they need to have this integration. So I would say that the biggest challenge that they have is the complexity of legacy machines and legacy systems and how to make them to work together on a highly efficient way.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there of what we see in terms of the value of the partnership that we have between AWS and Telit, where, you know, AWS doesn't have the domain expertise that you do of that shop floor, the hundreds of protocols that may be present, and the variety of equipment and interconnectivity, the protocol conversion that needs to take place. I think that's where we see a lot of that value in Telit's ability to connect, convert those protocols, standardize that data to create, you know, what we would call an industrial data platform or an IDP, or, you know, you also hear it referred to as a unified namespace that then you can work from, like you said, in the cloud to do additional kind of analytics and value add, which we'll talk about more later in the presentation. I think I just want to hammer on that point because sometimes customers that we run into, they think, well, you're AWS, you're really big, you can do all things to all people. This is a really specialized space that Telit is highly capable of delivering on. And from an AWS perspective, we also don't want to reinvent the wheel. And so we want to work with partners like yourselves to be able to provide the most efficient value for a customer in cracking that nut.
Absolutely. So when I look at that diagram here, how does it look like a diagram when you deploy this type of platform that DeviceWise can do this transformation and this integration between machines? So if I'm going to use my laser pointer here, DeviceWise is a software, and this is an edge software. So this edge software comes with hundreds of drivers. So basically for you to collect data from any type of machine is as simple as installing a printer at your computer. DeviceWise comes with hundreds of drivers, and we have the largest driver list in the industry. Of course, we have all the open protocols like OPC UA, OPC-DA, Modbus, BACnet, MT Connect, and more. But we also have all the native drivers. That means that when I'm talking to a Siemens device, I can use a Siemens S7 or S5 protocol. When I am talking to a Rockwell device, I'm going to use the Rockwell drivers. When I'm talking to a Torque tool, I'm going to use an Atlas Copco or Ingersoll Rand protocol there, so I can ingest the data from these devices on a very non-invasive and productive way. Also, DeviceWise is written bare to the metal. So it is not only we have the largest list of drivers, but we also have the highest performance. The latency we have on DeviceWise is close to zero, especially on discrete manufacturing. Low latency in terms of this data federation and integration with machines is going to be critical for you to guarantee high performance on your productivity. But not only we can collect the data from these machines, but we can do an edge data transformation. I can do the parsing, separating this message, understanding based on the message that I'm receiving, what is the action that I will take here. If I receive this type of data, maybe I should send this data into my SAP ERP system. But maybe I should collect this data and send into the AWS platform for all the traceability and serialization and data lake here in the cloud. You can use also device-wise view as an edge HMI visualization. So now I can show all this data that is being collected from the machines, processed on the edge, aggregating with the IT system, and then combining with the machine learning and AI that you can run here on your AWS platform, combine all this data and provide the edge visualization for operators and managers. And also using mobile devices as an input for operators to even augment this data that have been collected from machines, from cameras, and from IT systems in general, providing a complete integration between all the different machines and all the different types of IT systems.
It's interesting to me, and I'd be curious to hear what you would say to a customer who might ask, if I deploy device-wise, why would I also utilize maybe some of the AWS IoT services? How do they work together? What's Telit's opinion on working with some of those AWS native IoT services, not just kind of to pull data into the cloud, but also maybe work with like IoT Sitewise, for example?
Sitewise is a brilliant solution, and we have a native integration with Sitewise. These native IoT services of AWS, they bring all the applications that a large or medium-sized manufacturing facility they need. And then device-wise can simplify this the architecture of the systems by feeding the data there. Device-wise is a solution very specialized on collecting the data, aggregating this data from multiple sources, and then providing this data to the end application. And then Sitewise is a solution that we are very excited with because it provides for plant managers, for operators, the ability of really having the sense of the data that was collected from these multiple sources. And then, Dave, when I look at this industrial environment, I always like to divide the use cases in two types of use cases. One that I like to call connected factories. And then we are talking about manufacturing companies in general, right? We are talking about a car maker or a pharmaceutical company where all the machines, they will be in a certain facilities or in a number of facilities, and they will have different types of IT components in the cloud or on-prem, and they will have to have this integration. But there's also another type of use case that I like a lot that we work together with AWS, that is for connected machines. Thinking in terms of how machine builders, they can have their machines connected out of the box. And then we have several of our customers consuming our software, loading this in cellular gateways, putting these cellular gateways inside the cabinet of the machine. And then we can move this data from the edge into the cloud, where the customer can have a digital twin of his devices. He can have a remote monitoring, and even using device-wise to have a direct access here, a secure remote access back to this solution for him to fix problems over the air. This means that they have a full connectivity on their tools, doesn't matter where the tool is. So, Dave, maybe we should now enter here in one specific use case. And I really like a lot this use case that we did together. As you know, this company here that we're talking about is one of the largest tier one automotive companies in the world. They are a tire manufacturer. That they have more than 31,000 employees and 19 production plants in 12 countries. So the way that they approached both Telit and AWS was with a vision that they need to have a digital transformation, that they need to have visibility in terms of how their factory is running. They need to monitor this. And they decided that the best tool for this monitoring of operations was in AWS ecosystem. So they decided, okay, I want to use the AWS, but now I have a challenge. I have more than 4,000 machines spread all around the world. And how can I ingest this data in the AWS systems for me to have this complete data visualization, all the learnings, the machine learnings that they can provide if I need to connect this huge number of machines from different vendors, and I need to do it on a very efficient way. The second thing that they had was a objective of reducing the costs of energy by 10% and reducing the cost of quality by 15%. What at this stage of the project, we can say that these targets were achieved. So let's jump here into a diagram that we can see how we structured this business. So the way that this business was structured was loading device-wise in edge devices. And these devices, they can be a small gateway or a IPC, an industrial computer. As device-wise is OS agnostic, you can load device-wise basically in any type of device. It could be an ARM-based device, it could be a Windows, a Linux, even a big mainframe. Here we had a very distributed architecture in order to have the load distributed in many different edge devices, every line having an edge device running its own logic. Loading device-wise could ingest the data from the different controllers and also external instrumentation that was needed there. They would like to have a serialization, and the serialization was coming from, was instrumented by putting barcode readers in front of the line. And now the device-wise edge platform had to combine the data input coming from the machine itself, from the barcode reader, and they identified that to guarantee the high quality of a certain process in curing of the tires, they need to have an external instrumentation using thermal sensors. So they could have all the visualization of all this data here on the edge, providing this feedback to the operators that are there, and then providing all this integration with the existing MES, the manufacturing execution system that they were using, that was a homegrown MES, and bringing all this data combined and consolidated into the AWS infrastructure for all the IoT applications. Dave, would you like to add some comments here on this diagram?
Absolutely, Ricardo. I think this is a really great use case with Pirelli here around, how we're extracting data from the shop floor, from the equipment, other systems, and how DeviceWise is helping to consolidate and create and move that data into the AWS ecosystem of services. I think it's worth pointing out that with Pirelli's desire to, improve their energy efficiency, improve product quality, that collection of the data is half the story. And the other half is really, once it gets to AWS, then what happens? And I think this is maybe where I'll just briefly mention some of the work that our other partner, Deloitte, has been doing with Pirelli in this set of use cases. And where I think this adds value in terms of, as a customer, how I might approach leveraging different specialists in different areas to deliver a comprehensive solution across their enterprise. So if you think about getting that data into AWS, what that essentially makes it is a consistent and uniform foundation that analytics and other application providers can use either in an off-the-shelf way, in an accelerated kind of system integration way to provide a more efficient delivery, a cheaper cost to value based on those use cases. So Deloitte is able to pick up from AWS's IoT services like IoT Core, IoT SiteWise, the S3 storage buckets to be able to fuel their smart factory fabric solution. And within that, there's a couple different modules that they're leveraging at Pirelli around just the machine monitoring. So just being able to, look at the historic visualizations of data, what's happening with that machine, trend analysis, starting to calculate things like OEE and other KPIs, and drive alerts or other things of that nature from just a monitoring perspective. That leads typically what we see into a predictive maintenance area that then starts to integrate other AWS services like some of our AI ML services, such as Lookout for Equipment, to further reduce things like scrap or rework, to improve on machine uptime, reduce unplanned downtime, maintenance, labor costs, and other things like that, because you're able to forecast and see when a piece of equipment is starting to fail. And typically, from Deloitte's perspective, what they see are things like an 8 to 12% increase in that uptime, 10 to 20%, reduction in those maintenance labor costs. And that can be done by being more efficient, making sure the spare parts inventory is on hand, things like that. And so, thinking about it from, the audience here's perspective, would love to, ask a rhetorical question of them around what some of those kind of gains might mean to your operations. And thinking through what that would look like, where you have a solution that's leveraging Telit to bring data in, and then other analytics partners such as a Deloitte or we have ISVs as well that offer very specialized solutions in certain factors that enable us to help drive that kind of performance increase in some of these use cases. So. I think that's maybe all I'll say on that, but I think that's the linchpin here is getting data into AWS and having that uniform foundation so that it can then be analyzed by the pantheon of other AWS partners who are doing, very specialized, could be very industry specific or very niche. It could also be, something that's relatively off the shelf from a low cost perspective to a customer to be able to democratize IoT and AI/ML based solutions. And that's really something we're looking to drive at AWS around this, and that we've seen value at Pirelli from.
And Dave, I really liked, your comments around that. I totally agree with you that this technology becomes something foundational. This means that you are putting the building blocks there for the existing applications, but also allowing the customer to organize the architecture into a way that they can keep evolving their manufacturing process, their tools, their visualizations, their reports, because now they have all these components there in a very no-code, low-code type of platform where they can keep extending the applications as the business evolves. So what I think it's also very unique about this use case is how the customer had this very strategic view to say, okay, I understand that my operation is very complex and this complexity brings cost. If I keep reinventing the wheel without having a standardization, what I will have is a high cost of deployment and also a high cost in terms of the performance of these tools. By selecting a platform for the edge to communicate with the machines and a platform for all the applications and the cloud with AWS, he created the foundation to keep on top of the technology and create a standards for this policy. So I think that's a very brilliant step that was taken by this customer. So entering here in some details, and I personally love to show the software live. Unfortunately, for the sake of this webinar, I will not be able to. But if you just Google, you're going to find several demonstrations of the product, and you're going to see how easy it is for you to start with the data collection. As I keep repeating myself here, DeviceWise is a no-code platform. This means that you can simply click here on New Device, pick one of the drivers of the hundreds of drivers that we have, and start collecting this data. All the protocol translation can be done on the fly, so you can integrate any brand to any brand in terms of hardware to hardware connectivity. Not only you can collect the data, getting all your tag trees auto-enumerated, but now you can also make edge logic with this. I can say, based on this data, monitor a certain threshold. If it is above or below a certain threshold, send a message to the maintenance manager to say that something is weird here. Or you can also optimize your cloud costs by saying, instead of sending every single bit that changes on this machine, let's do this on the differential that I have on the tags, reducing the load that you are putting on your systems. And all these in a complete no-code solution that you just pick the driver, appoint the IP address, get all the tag tree auto-enumerated. Decide what you're going to do on the edge with this in a simple logic or in a very sophisticated logic on a complete no-code environment, creating all this standardization in terms of how to collect this data and how to transform this data. And then I can click one button and have all this data flying inside the AWS environment. For your IT integration, it is as simple as collecting the data from the devices. You can keep doing your logic. You can do a visualization for this. And then in the previous slide, we were showing how the data was being collected. And here how we are doing, for example, a BOM, a bill of material checking, saying, based on the information I am collecting from my MES. So device-wise is going to the MES and saying, hey, what is the recipe for that specific part number? And I am saying the specific part number because device-wise collected the data from a barcode reader, said, okay, that's the part number to be produced. Go there and query for what is the recipe for this part number. Receive this information back, display the data into the Edge HMI that is running device-wise view. And now collect the data from the actual controller and then visualize if all the parameters for this production are in line with the theoretical production parameters, and then take decisions in terms of what you're going to do. And bring all this data for a full traceability, integrating with the AWS platform. So I am collecting all this data on the edge, I am visualizing all this data, and based on my edge logic, I'm saying where this data needs to go. I'm bringing this data to SiteWise. I'm bringing this data to Greengrass. I am creating custom reporting, or I am integrating with other types of IT systems. So how do I get my project ready? The way that we see IoT, Dave, is on a much simplified way, thinking in terms of how we can, in baby steps, have applications very rapid. So we designed device-wise to be able to integrate any type of POC, robot, sensor or barcode reader, RFID reader, CNCs, torque tools, even wearables and cameras for operators monitoring and more in one platform, natively integrated to all the different AWS systems and all the different types of databases and IT systems that customers are using. So we can do data collections, KPIs, internal DB, data visualization, and more. So we see industrial IoT as a journey where customers, they will have endless necessities and the platform needs to provide different solutions based on this. So you can think in terms of this technology to do complete machine-to-machine integration and automation. In this use case that we mentioned, we talked about integrating sensors, barcode readers, and a PLC. But it could also be, doing a robotization of this line, integrating a robot and using your edge platform to say, when the robot should start moving, stop moving, and doing all this machine-to-machine integration. When you have that, starting a preventive and predictive maintenance is a matter of hours, not even days. You can tell device-wise, hey, count how many cycles of operations you went through, take this data, send this to AWS, and when you reach a certain number of cycles, you can ask device-wise, open a ticket for maintenance, whatever is your asset management system there. Or even doing a much more sophisticated predictive maintenance solution by collecting data such as vibration, temperature, cycle times, your throughput, your power consumption, creating thresholds for all these informations, automating this decision on the edge, and sending this information in AWS, where you can apply artificial intelligence and machine learning figuring out a model that will predict situations and then using device-wise to automate the response, like asking somebody to maintain this specific machine or change the configuration of the machine based on this new information that you learned with machine learning. You can think in terms of this technology as a zero defect quality control system, where you can monitor the performance of every machine, not letting defects to go ahead in your production line. You can use the platform for a complete OE and other KPIs monitoring and visualization, a complete IT OT integration, so you have all your devices as digital twins and digitally integrated with your platforms, and a complete AI integration with the AWS integration.
Thanks, Ricardo. I think, what I take away from what you just shared is there's a tremendous amount of flexibility and breadth in the ability for Telit, and particularly device-wise here, to work with customer situations on a variety of use cases. And I think, at AWS, we see a tremendously varied customer base and the need to have a varied approach to customers who are trying to solve some of these problems, be it OEE, be it quality control, like you've got listed there, be it, worker safety, or some of the other, energy and sustainability initiatives that we commonly see. And I think within that, the way to think about it from a customer's perspective is, what are those really compelling business cases where you've got challenges? So earlier in the presentation, you showed the slide with some of the auto manufacturers that you're working with, and thinking about quality control there and how much many of them spend as a percentage of revenue on warranty claims or things like that. And what that means is that that's a compelling business reason to invest in some of this technology. And once you have that kind of understanding, and between AWS, our partners like Telit and others, we can help work with customers to understand that. What we try to do is create an easy starting path, because this is so complicated that it can sometimes be a bit daunting in terms of where to start and how to get started. The approach we often take is around things like a fixed price, fixed scope pilot, where there's a clear definition of what's the use case we're going to attack, what's the timeline that we're going to deliver value in, and what's the cost going to be to that customer. We work with many partners in creating that. We also have taken that a step further and created this notion of an industrial IoT, or Industry 4.0 in a box, that would involve things like the requisite hardware that might need to be procured, connectivity solutions like this, AWS platform licenses, and then the analytics partners, like I mentioned earlier with Deloitte, that might sit on top of that, all bundled together in an easy transaction for the customer, so they don't have to go through the homework of figuring out who's the right player to work with, and having all of that heavy lifting taken care of for them, so that they can just get started and start to see value in these kind of activities. And then, building that roadmap in a collaborative fashion to take that from the first machine to the first line to the first plant to the entire enterprise, and thinking through, how different these use cases can be across different industries. So having sort of predefined solution packages in this way has been really beneficial for our customers as they try to address their specific use cases. The quality control one I just mentioned in automotive looks very different for a food processor. And so being able to provide both that breadth and depth of expertise by packaging this together, and then ease for that customer, has been a really substantial benefit that we've seen in going to market around some of these solutions. Because IoT, smart factories, those types of things are not new concepts, but it's still been something that, customers struggle with. And especially if they're not sort of the Fortune 50 in terms of their ability to leverage IoT and AI ML and some of these cutting edge technologies, being able to democratize that is something we feel very strongly in at AWS. And so that's kind of how we're approaching it when it comes to these types of use cases.
Fantastic. So Guys, thank you so much. Dave, thank you so much for the comments. I definitely see the evolution of this technology and the combination of DeviceWise and AWS as a very important partnership for us. And certainly we are helping many customers in terms of gaining productivity in the field. Miriam, thank you so much for the opportunity, and I pass the ball back to you in case we have time for questions and answers.